A thousand eyes gleamed beneath Helios Aviation's soaring glass dome, but all of them seemed fixed on Dr. Aria Thompson. She hadn't planned to attend today's Innovation Forum, not with her reputation in shreds and her badge barely accepted at the front desk. Yet, as the world watched and the lights seared their judgment into her, Aria realized too late, this was more than a showcase. It was an ambush. It was the kind of stage meant to dazzle, light dancing off frosted glass and burnished steel, casting prismatic reflections onto the faces of the industry's privileged elite and the camera crews arrayed at the periphery. Banners teased the brilliance of Helios Aviation's next evolution, although, here, most faces carried the smug relaxation of the already victorious. Vincent Harrington, CEO and golden child of the board, strode forth in a navy suit so bespoke it probably had its own passport. His voice, charismatic and razor-edged, slid over the audience like silk sheeting over cold marble. "Ladies and gentlemen, today is not just about innovation," he declared. "It's about accountability. After all, what future can we build without demanding excellence from all?" Polite applause rose, but there was an edge, something brittle, anticipatory. In the fourth row, half obscured by a brass edge of the stage, Aria sat perfectly still. Her heart pounded, she could feel sweat prickling beneath her neat suit, but her chin didn't tremble. Not in front of these people. These same engineers, executives, and competitors had only a month ago whispered that she suffered from delusions of grandeur, that she couldn't possibly have led the VY-16X's software breakthrough, and now, to her horror, she'd realized Harrington's invitation had not been a peace offering, but a summons for her own public reckoning. She flashed briefly on the email from Priya last night. "Double-check badge. Walk with your head high, Aria," and drew in a deep breath. "As you all know," Harrington continued, a wolfish smile curling under his crisp-cut beard, "leadership isn't afraid of scrutiny. In fact, genuine leaders are forged when confronted with their shortcomings." His hazel eyes scanned the rows and fixed, hungrily, on her. Aria felt the first cold bite of expectation as Harrington's assistant whispered her name, beckoning for her to stand. The screens behind him shimmered to life. A swirling logo, then a freeze frame, showing her at last year's awards banquet. It lingered too long. A hostess, glossy-haired and nervous, murmured gently as she eased Aria toward the stage. Amara's shoes clicked out a lonely rhythm all the way up those steps. The auditorium felt like an immense breathing animal. Thousands of eyes, some expectant, some narrow and hungry, trained themselves on her. Murmurs sifted through the air. "Dr. Aria Thompson," Harrington boomed, extending a hand she did not want to take. But she pressed her palm to his before pulling away, steady. "Helios Aviation has long prided itself on bold claims," he said, his voice amplifying through the auditorium like judgment. "Today, we test those claims." Images flashed on the screens behind him, blueprints, lines of code. Her code, Aria realized with a twist of fury. But nobody else seemed to notice. Harrington's voice lowered slightly, as if confiding a secret to the world. "You all know of Dr. Johnson's work. The brilliance, yes, but also the recent complications." He gave a sanctimonious little nod to the board members in the front row. "I've invited Dr. Johnson here today for a chance at redemption, one only a true visionary could seize, should she possess the courage." Flashes popped from the press pit. Somewhere, an engineer snickered. Aria stood there, every cell humming. Humiliation flared in her cheeks. But she lifted her gaze and let it sweep the space, daring each narrowed pair of eyes to meet hers. Harrington's words pressed in, cold and syrupy. "We've had questions about the VY-16X engine's readiness. Dr. Johnson, in the interest of full transparency, I challenge you, here, before your peers, our board, and the global press, to show us just how impossible your software solutions truly are. Redemption or revelation." A rumble went through the crowd, part amusement, part discomfort. Even those who'd never spoken to her craned forward, eager for blood or a miracle. Amara's jaw tensed. The walls felt closer now. The cold draft of the vents whistled along exposed metal beams above. She glanced to her left, the shadowed wings of the stage where technicians shifted with practiced stealth. A hand, tan, fine-boned, fingertips ink-stained, lifted in a subtle wave. "Priya." A brief flicker of safety. Aria let her eyelids flicker once. The code for, "I see you in graduate school Morse." Harrington milked the moment for the assembled press, drawing out the drama. "Are you ready, Dr. Johnson? For the sake of transparency, Helios's own senior team will be present throughout. No closed doors, no private diagnostics. Just your hands, your mind, in 60 minutes. He let the phrase hang in the charged air. And let us all recall, if you should require support, our top engineers are at your disposal, though I doubt you'll require a rescue, given your formidable academic background. The words held layers of venom under the polished surface, the implication that Amara, even if she failed, would not do so alone. The lights shifted, illuminating the center of the stage. Twin technicians rolled in the massive VY-16X engine, battered from months of failed tweaks and, if the rumors were true, deliberate sabotage meant to render it unsalvageable. The thing was beautiful and monstrous. Polished alloy and scorched carbon fiber, its complex innards shielded by scuffed panels. It looked less like a piece of advanced machinery and more like a wounded animal, both outcast and centerpiece for this orchestrated trial. A hush settled on the room as Amara approached, laboring to keep her breath steady. Each click of her heels echoed on the gleaming floor. Before her, Gregory Ames leaned in, voice pitched for her alone. Helios's best couldn't get her flying, doctor, he said with a crooked grin, but maybe a fresh set of eyes, and your famous untested theories, will finally put the old girl out of her misery. Thank you for your concern, Greg, Amara replied. She didn't take her eyes off the engine, refusing distraction. All around, Helios's elite engineers gathered in whispered clusters, arms crossed, telegraphing their contempt. Some watched with predatory amusement, others masked nerves behind silence. Every click of a faraway camera, every shuffled note on a tablet added to the pressure, turning Amara's simple approach into a gauntlet walk. She willed her expression neutral, but inside, fury and humiliation tangled with resolve. The timer flashed onto the screens, ringing the auditorium. 60, 00. Harrington's voice thundered for the official start. Begin! The first screw came loose beneath Amara's gloved hand with a soft crack, louder in the silence than seemed possible. She worked methodically, each gesture a quiet rebellion, every movement building a buffer between her dignity and their derision. As she loosened the second panel, a conventionally handsome engineer, someone she recognized from her old team, called out, "Need a diagram, Dr. Johnson?" The suggestion, innocent on the surface, was underscored by jeering undertones. A few snickers answered him, but Amara kept her face perfectly still. Instead, she glanced up at the vast wall of screens, then across the crowd, searching for opponents and allies alike. In the front row, a few investors watched, deadpan, not amused but calculating. The press, as much as the engineers, were here for blood or miracles. Only Priya remained utterly focused on her, her lips forming words meant for the comms. You've got this, Amara. Remember who you are. Take your time when you need it. The engine's outer skin lifted away with a metallic thunk, revealing the labyrinth of circuits, twisted fuel lines, clustered sensors, some familiar, some peculiarly foreign. It was a puzzle, laced with danger, both technical and personal. As she scrutinized each component, cataloging damage and deviation, she heard faint whispers from the engineering pit. Bets being placed, questions as to whether she'd even last the first 15 minutes before admitting defeat. Looks even worse than I expected, one engineer smirked. Can't wait to see her try her signature coding tricks on hardware, another sneered. Amara's hands never wavered. She addressed the room, her voice steady. I won't need a diagram. I know what's wrong with this engine. The bigger question is whether you do. The room stiffened, the air crackling with anticipation and unease. Harrington clapped, slow and mocking. Confidence is admirable, Dr. Johnson. But, well, as they say, the proof is in the product. Carry on, and we'll all be watching every step of the way. They were, hungry, skeptical, ready to pounce. The threat of failure, the promise of triumph, all collapsed into the next tick of the clock, but standing there, outnumbered, outgunned, yet never alone. Amara locked eyes with Priya once more, silently pledging that if justice could not be had on their terms, she would claim it on her own. The next hour would decide everything. She paused, glanced at the digital clock. 52 minutes. No panic. Instead, she followed the signs. Wire insulation shaved back at a 30-degree angle. Helios's junior techs preferred 45. The unmistakable scent of cheap flux from a third-party board. Not mistakes. These were obstacles, each intended to slow her down, to force a misstep that would provide the world with her spectacular failure. Amara knelt, leaning in close, and pressed her phone camera beneath the main power bus. Click. There. Serial numbers hand-etched, barely visible, matching the set she'd logged months ago, right before she'd discovered her designs lifted and her access revoked. Another booby trap, a power module set to trip if voltage exceeded a certain unmarked threshold. She made her next move slowly and visibly, ensuring both the audience and hidden cameras, there were at least 4, caught every detail. "Notice," she said, loud enough to carry, "I am removing the extraneous ferrite mesh Helios's team installed after my tenure. This is not standard." She dropped the warped components into a transparent tray with a clatter. The senior engineers exchanged nervous glances. Harrington's mouth pinched. He pushed his microphone. "A bold claim, Dr. Johnson. Are you saying our top specialists have made errors?" "No," Amara replied, her voice clear and controlled. "I'm saying these aren't errors. They're deliberate countermeasures. I assume you'd prefer transparency?" She didn't wait for assent. A neat, rhetorical checkmate. The crowd rumbled, the smell of shifting tides beginning to waft over the carefully choreographed humiliation. Back to the task. She needed to isolate the primitive malware infecting the software bus. With an elegant flick, she pulled her tablet, the same model Priya had resecured after the security breach, linked its diagnostics module, and began a silent scan. On the screen, red script flickered, outlining mismatched OS kernels fighting for control. A sabotage routine disguised as an update. The code's signature bore the southern drawl of Gregory Ames's programming style, sloppily overwritten atop her original modular sequence. She smirked. "Amateurs," she thought, and then into her mic. "Priya, I've got Ames's prints on the sabotage routine, logging everything." "Got it. Video and logs are uploading," Priya whispered back. "My trace just flagged a deleted Slack channel. Turns out most of the senior team were watching live edits the night the engine failed. Plenty of receipts." "Textbook," Amara muttered. But there was no celebration yet. Every second was danger. A missed resistor or a mistimed software patch could mean not only the end of her career, but possibly a literal explosion. She checked the clock again. 44 minutes. Still time, if you stay sharp. Methodically, Amara began detaching non-standard relays and rerouting their connections through her now unlicensed control harness. To the layperson, it all looked like a chaotic scattering of wires and code. But to those who understood, it was the construction of a symphony, a restoration of balance, order from sabotage. In the swirl of movement, someone's voice cut through, clear and contemptuous. "When that thing sparks, don't say we didn't warn you." Laughter. She didn't look up, instead angled her head so her necklace mic pointed at the heckler. "In fact," she said for both the crowd and Priya's benefit, "all sabotage will be logged and evidence shared live to ensure the integrity of this demonstration." A hush lingered after that. Inside her mind, a ledger ticked forward, wires replaced, 13, sabotage chips, 11, malicious code vectors corrected, 10. With each fix, the VY16X looked less like a wounded animal and more like a masterpiece revealed through careful conservation. Amara worked for her integrity, her future, but most of all, for the intellectual inheritance too often denied to women like her. She could not help but feel that every onlooker, every watching breath, demanded not just a solution to a technical puzzle, but proof that she had not been an imposter, that her genius was not some accident of inclusion. Sweat prickled her brow, but her hands never shook. She paused to breathe in the whir of the stadium's massive fans, mixing with the gentle hum of the VY16X's core, half lifeless and half expectant. "Priya," she whispered, one eye on the clock. "Watch for code pings from any device, labeled Vulture." That's their remote kill switch. "I see it. Patching in a deadman proxy now. If they try to shut you down, I'll flip the trace back on them," Priya answered, her voice a soft anchor beneath the storm of noise. One by one, Amara cleaned the engine of its poison, and with every move, the balance of power drifted further from spectacle to subtler, sharper resistance. The battle was only beginning, but already the VY16X was hers again, piece by piece, wire by wire, code by code. The crowd whispered again. A few of the younger engineers exchanged quick glances. These were words that had not come from the mouth of anyone in the room aside from Amara. Their skepticism now wrestled with a dawning awe. Harrington's voice dropped to a growl. "Dr. Johnson, this spectacle may be entertaining, but it won't change the facts." Amara snapped back, voice steady and clear, projecting beyond the microphones. "Facts do change, Mr. Harrington, especially when you try to silence the truth." The tension on stage thickened, each sentence like the tightening of a noose. Amara's fingers worked faster now, rerouting circuits, overriding corrupt code, her breath steady despite the grinding weight of pressure pressing in from every angle. Near the ignition module, a pattern began to emerge on her smartwatch's concealed camera. Coded sequences, etched faintly but unmistakably on the circuit board. She zoomed in, heart rate unchanged, though a spark of vindication flared behind her eyes. That signature belonged to her. The code was her own doctoral thesis work, the patented ignition protocol she had developed years before, stolen from her when she was cast out. Her fingers trembled for a fraction of a second as she silently snapped a photo beneath the panel's edge, careful not to draw attention. Then, just as deliberately, she leveled her gaze at Harrington, voice ringing across the cavernous auditorium. "Mr. Harrington, would you care to explain why this ignition module contains code trademarked and patented by me in 2017? A hush fell like a shroud as the crowd absorbed her words. Harrington's practiced composure cracked, his mouth opening, then closing without sound. His engineers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. A few voice murmurs echoed through the audience. Journalists leaned forward, sensing a pivot from spectacle to scandal. Amara pressed on, undeterred. "I believe the audience and the Helios board deserve transparency, especially after the recent revelations of sabotage. If this code belongs to Helios, it belongs because it was stolen in violation of intellectual property laws." The ripple in the crowd blossomed into a wave. Reporters began tapping rapidly at phones. Social media feeds exploded, viewers demanding answers in real time. Priya's voice buzzed softly in Amara's ear, an anchor in the storm. "Asterisk heading in now. Federal agents are on the premises. They've got all the evidence. Your photos, your mic recordings. Prepare yourself." Harrington's glare shot daggers at both women, but it was too late. The stage lights flickered with the heavy weight of shifting power. Amara felt a rare surge of quiet triumph. Not the hollow victory of public spectacle, but the genuine satisfaction of having exposed the rot beneath the glitzy surface. As Harrington opened his mouth to respond, a cluster of uniformed agents passed security, moving swiftly through the crowd toward the stage. The atmosphere transformed instantly, from mockery and doubt to tense anticipation. Cameras pivoted away from Amara for the first time since the challenge began, now trained on the converging law enforcement as whispers turned to gasps. Amara's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the steady beat of vindication. She straightened, squared her shoulders, and met the eyes of those watching now as more than just an engineer on a stage, but a warrior, demanding truth. Behind the scenes, Priya's fingers paused over the keyboard. Her final transmission was a simple line sent up the chain of command, "Asterisk case ready. Arrest imminent." Back on stage, Gregory Ames shifted uneasily, his facade fraying in real time. Harrington's expression twisted, an empire building on lies crumbling in full view. Amara felt the hourglass finally give way to a tide that would not be turned, an unstoppable surge toward reckoning. The impossible engine no longer felt like a trap, but a testament to the perseverance of truth beneath smokescreens, to the power of brilliance undiminished by force or circumstance. The clock ticked. The spotlight burned hot, but Amara was no longer alone on this stage. Justice had arrived. Amara's fingers hovered lightly over the ignition module, the cool metal beneath the casing almost betraying no sign of the years-old betrayal it concealed. She had barely looked at this part before. Her eyes had scanned the engine's every configuration, every wire, every chip. But the irregularities she'd spotted minutes ago had now focused her attention like a laser. This small component, nestled deep in the labyrinth of the VY16X's core, bore a sequence of etched numbers she recognized before she even analyzed the code embedded within. On the cool glass of her smartwatch, Amara quickly activated the hidden camera app, angling her wrist subtly to capture the signature. The ignition module's code was unmistakable, the unique algorithm she had painstakingly developed during her graduate thesis at MIT, patented and copyrighted under her name in 2017. It was the keystone of any successful ignition sequence. Her invention, stolen and twisted to sabotage her work and, more urgently, to discredit her capabilities. Her heart pounded quietly beneath her smooth exterior, not from fear, but from a rising surge of vindication. Years of quiet fight and whispered attempts to bury her contributions seemed to culminate here, in the literal guts of this engine. She glanced stepwise around the stage. The audience buzzed with a distracted energy, some murmuring quietly, others fixated on her efforts with thinly masked disbelief. She could feel Harrington's eyes locked on her back like steel traps, sizing her every move with condescending amusement. But Amara had no intention of hiding the truth any longer. "May I have a moment?" she called out, voice even but firm, carrying clearly over the microphone hooked to her collar. Vincent Harrington, who was pacing and gesturing expansively before the cameras, turned sharply toward her, his smile tightening. A few of the Helios engineers chuckled nervously, whispering among themselves. Amara raised her wrist, holding the faintly glowing screen toward the front rows. This ignition module contains an algorithm patented by me in 2017. Unless the powers that be here at Helios have a credible explanation, I'd suggest we examine the provenance of this part. There was a palpable shift in the room's atmosphere. Voices dropped, the scuffle of feet ceased, and the hum of the overhead lights suddenly felt magnified. Harrington's microphone crackled as he opened his mouth to reply, but all that emerged was a forced chuckle, quickly swallowed by a cough. The lead engineer, Gregory Ames, who had been strolling near the sidelines with that smug air, cleared his throat and stepped forward reluctantly, attempting to regain the narrative. "That's an internal matter," he said carefully, avoiding direct eye contact with Amara. "You might not be fully aware of ongoing upgrades and intellectual property acquisitions within the company." "Internal matter?" Amara countered, stepping toward the microphone, lowering her voice so the cameras could catch every word. "Or internal theft? Because as far as the public record and the patent office indicates, that code belongs to me. I'd love to know if Helios has documentation for your claims beyond corporate secrecy." Murmurs rippled across the auditorium. From the front row, a few board members frowned, casting uneasy glances at one another. Amara scanned the crowd, noting a mixture of surprise, confusion, and hesitation. For the first time, the polished facade of Helios felt porous, vulnerable. Behind the scenes, Priya was monitoring the live feed on her tablet. She tapped swiftly, sending a torrent of encrypted files and audio clips to the Department of Justice, files painstakingly collected over months, showing email chains, security breaches, and voice recordings implicating Harrington and Ames in the theft and sabotage. Her hands were steady but rapid, fingers flying across the screen as she forwarded the key evidence, along with Amara's live video and audio. Back on stage, Harrington's confident mask cracked, ever so slightly, a twitch in his eye, a hand that momentarily faltered at his side. "Miss Johnson," he said, voice nearly robotic now, "such assertions are baseless. Helios has always operated in compliance with corporate and legal standards." "No," Amara replied, meeting his gaze without blinking. "You have tried to bury me. You used my work without credit or consent, and then sabotaged this beast to make me fail. The evidence is here, in your face. And now, it's in the hands of those who will see truth done." The audience now watched with rapt, stunned silence. Reporters behind cameras whispered fervently as tweets and comments exploded on social media from the live stream. The story had just turned. What had been a spectacle of humiliation was morphing into a crescendo of accountability. In the control room, adjacent to the auditorium, the hum of activity intensified. Priya's eyes never left the monitors as she whispered into her headset, "They've got the evidence. Federal agents are en route. Hold steady, Amara." On stage, Amara felt the weight of the moment, but also something lighter, a shift in the collective energy. The subtle hierarchy of power that had kept her marginalized was fracturing. Harrington's voice dropped into a low, dangerous murmur, but carried clearly through the mic. "If you think this public stunt will damage Helios, you're mistaken. We will vigorously contest any false accusations." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras pivoted, capturing her every word. The live broadcast feed exploded with viewer comments, incredulous, outraged, demanding answers. Amara's gaze sliced through the sea of faces, landing squarely on Harrington, whose expression faltered, his practiced confidence cracking like thin glass. "For years, I developed this algorithm," Amara continued, voice firm, but calm. "It was stolen from my research files, altered slightly, and used here without my consent or credit. I'm asking Helios right now, can you explain this coincidence?" Vincent's lips pressed into a thin line. The crowd's reaction sharpened. Investors traded anxious glances, reporters pressed microphones forward, and engineers who moments ago sneered began to frown with growing doubts. Even Gregory Ames, usually so composed, shifted uncomfortably, whispering into his sleeve. Harrington finally found his voice, his tone dripping with false indignation. "Dr. Johnson, these allegations are baseless. Helios maintains the highest standards of integrity. Any similarities are purely coincidental or the result of standard technical convergence. We deny any wrongdoing." A ripple of derision burst from the crowd, no longer directed at Amara, but at the CEO's transparent deflection. Harrington's eyes darted toward the control room, where Priya's subtle nod was unmistakably clear. Federal agents were minutes away. The standoff crystallized, the power dynamics flipping in an instant. Amara's microphone crackled softly with Priya's voice, calm and steady, but urgent. "They're moving in now. Stay sharp." Amara swallowed the lump building in her throat, not from fear, but a rising tide of vindication. The moment was bigger than her own triumph. It was a reckoning for every slight, every disrespect, every stolen idea dismissed by the arrogance of old guard corporate power. She turned back to the audience, her voice lowering but no less resolute. The proof is here. I stand not just for myself, but for every voice crushed under the weight of corruption and discrimination. This is the future, where truth and merit cannot be buried. The tension burst like a dam breaking. Suddenly, the auditorium doors at the back flung open as a contingent of federal agents moved in, their badges flashing under the stark lights. Cameras swung to catch the unfolding drama live. Harrington straightened, attempting a show of control, but it was too late. "Vincent Harrington," an agent announced, "you are under arrest for intellectual property theft, conspiracy to sabotage company property, and obstruction of justice." Voices erupted simultaneously, gasps, shouts, murmurs, a cacophony of disbelief and fascination. Harrington's jaw clenched as he was escorted toward the exit, his eyes locking briefly on Amara, a mixture of fury and something else. Dread, perhaps. Gregory Ames followed, handcuffed and mumbling protests, his composure shattered. On stage, a stunned silence fell before the crowd erupted into whispers and low cheers. Some board members rose quickly, murmuring eager disclaimers to distance themselves from the scandal. The live stream exploded. Tweets and posts flooded in with a blend of outrage against Helios's leadership and admiration for Amara's courage. In the sudden calm, Priya emerged from the wings, her eyes shining brightly as she clasped Amara's hand firmly. Their silent exchange spoke volumes, years of unyielding friendship and unbreakable trust woven into a single moment of shared victory. Reporters pressed forward, eager for statements. Cameras zoomed in on Amara, now the undeniable center of this historic storm. Vincent Harrington's regime at Helios had finally been unmasked, not by internal whistleblowers or anonymous leaks, but by the very woman he tried to destroy, standing tall, under the glaring lights, refusing to be silenced. Amara's heart pounded, yet her face held the serene fire of someone who had fought through darkness and emerged into the light. In the shadow of betrayal, she found strength. Where there had been sabotage, she sowed truth. And as federal agents led the disgraced CEO away, the crowd's awe rippled through the cavernous hall. The turning point had come. Amara glanced at the battered VY-16X engine once more, the broken symbol of stolen potential now waiting for justice and restoration. Her fingers twitched with the knowledge that her work was far from over. Priya squeezed her hand again, a quiet promise. "We're just getting started." The applause began tentatively, then swelled into a standing ovation, the sound echoing off glass and steel like the herald of a new era. Vincent Harrington's downfall was no longer just a personal victory. It was an indictment of a system that tolerated theft and silence. In that charged atmosphere, Amara became more than an engineer. She became a symbol. The live broadcast cut briefly to commercial, then returned as reporters debriefed, experts debated, and the world watched in real time as the unraveling of a corporate empire unfolded exactly as Amara had envisioned. Her message was clear. No amount of sabotage, deceit, or discrimination could silence innovation, integrity, and truth. As the event moved toward its uncertain close, and Helios's leadership scrambled to contain the fallout, Amara's mind raced ahead. There was still one challenge remaining, proving not just the theft, but that she could restore the engine and bring the VY-16X back to life. She stepped forward, voice steady and clear once more. "Now that the truth is out, I will finish what I came here to do. This engine's future depends on honest work, not sabotage." The crowd, still buzzing with revelations, fell quiet in anticipation. Amara rolled up her sleeves, the weight of the hours ahead pressing on her, but for the first time buoyed by more than impatience. It was hope. Hope that innovation could be reclaimed. Hope that justice could be served. Hope that her perseverance might spark a revolution. Her fingers brushed the cold metal once more, steady and sure, ready to breathe life back into the impossible machine. And in that breathing silence, the world waited, ready for the next chapter to unfold. The auditorium's charged atmosphere was shattered in an instant as a squad of federal agents surged onto the stage, stepping with a brisk, no-nonsense precision that silenced the murmur swelling through the crowd. Camera crews pivoted their lenses, reporters scrambled to adjust their mics, and the hum of whispered excuses and shocked gasps erupted into full-blown chaos. Vincent Harrington's confident smirk twisted into a stunned grimace. He barely had time to stammer a denial before two agents reached him. "Vincent Harrington, you're under arrest for theft, sabotage, and conspiracy," one announced coldly, snapping handcuffs on his wrists. Gregory Ames, the chief designer who had ridiculed Amara mere minutes before, was seized next. His protests dissolved into frantic pleas as he was pulled away, eyes darting toward Helios's elite engineers, who now looked anywhere but at him. Amara stood motionless for a heartbeat, the tension in her chest deflating like a balloon released from a child's grip. Priya emerged from the shadows backstage, her face a quiet mixture of triumph and relief as she clasped Amara's trembling hand. Around them, whispers swirled, some in disbelief, others in grudging respect. "This is unbelievable," a board member muttered, glancing at her colleagues, many of whom had been quick to throw Amara under the bus mere hours earlier. Reporters shifted from filming Amara's struggle to broadcasting live footage of the arrests, their voices thick with disbelief. "Breaking news out of Helios Aviation's Innovation Forum," one anchor declared. "Federal agents have just arrested CEO Vincent Harrington and chief designer Gregory Ames on charges related to intellectual property theft and deliberate sabotage of critical technology." Amara's eyes found Priya's, their silent connection conveying the enormity of what had just occurred. Months of quiet investigation, whispered warnings, and meticulous evidence gathering had culminated in this explosive moment. The stage that had been set for her public humiliation had become a national reckoning. Harrington, flanked by the agents, struggled to regain control for the cameras, his voice trembling with forced authority. "This is a gross miscarriage of justice, baseless accusations orchestrated by—" "Silence!" snapped the lead agent. "You'll have your day in court." Priya squeezed Amara's hand again, guiding her gently off the stage into the now uncluttered backstage area. Staff bustled past, some whispering congratulations, others stunned into silence. The strobe lights of the news cameras continued flashing through the glass facade, capturing every second of the unraveling spectacle. "The Department of Justice called it right," Priya said softly, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "They acted the moment we sent over the evidence. They won't be able to spin this away." Amara nodded, her mind still reeling but sharpening into resolve. This was more than personal vindication now. It was a moment that promised a seismic shift inside Helios and maybe across the entire aerospace industry. Back in the auditorium, a faction of board members who had fiercely backed Harrington were rapidly distancing themselves, issuing cautious statements of neutrality and shock. Others remained glued to the unfolding drama, a rare moment of solidarity forming around a woman they had once dismissed. One of the senior engineers, a middle-aged man with graying temples who had silently observed Amara's work, approached hesitantly. "Dr. Johnson, your expertise, it's undeniable. I'm sorry it took this to bring it to light." The room, still buzzing from the sudden sweep of federal agents that had taken Harrington and Ames away in handcuffs, now simmered with an uneasy energy. Whispers bounced off the glass walls, a cyclone of disbelief, triumph, and dawning respect. The broadcast cameras continued rolling, though the tone had irrevocably shifted from spectacle to testimony. Surveillance drones hovered quietly above, capturing every reaction, every exchange. And through it all, Amara stood at the center of the stage, the disassembled VY-16X engine before her like a skeleton waiting to be breathed back to life. For a moment, the auditorium fell silent, as though the very air were holding its breath. Then Amara stepped forward, her movements deliberate, commanding, yet calm. Every pair of eyes, press, investors, engineers, even the shaken Helios board members pressed into watching from the shadows, fixed firmly on her. "I'd like to finish what I was brought here to do," Amara said, her voice steady but earnest. "Not just to vindicate myself, but to prove that innovation thrives on integrity, and that true progress can never be built on theft or sabotage." There was no smirk, no bitterness, just quiet dignity. A soft ripple of approval went through the crowd. A few engineers, those who had earlier been part of the sneering chorus doubting her competence, straightened in their seats, exchanging glances. The elder flight technician near the control panel subtly nodded. The weight of history was shifting with each measured word she spoke. Amara knelt beside the engine, her fingers gliding over panels and connectors as if reacquainted with an old friend. Her mind raced. This was no casual fix. The sabotage had been meticulous, almost surgical. Rewired circuits intended to misfire under pressure, false diagnostics programmed into the onboard systems, and a hidden patch of corrupted firmware designed to cripple its elite safety overrides. But now, stripped bare under the unforgiving spotlight, the engine was hers to command again. "First," she explained aloud to the microphones and the streamed audience, "I need to replace the ignition controller with the corrected firmware I developed. This ensures precise combustion timing based on climate and altitude variables, not just hard-coded estimates." Her hands moved deftly inside the engine's exposed core, slipping the flawed module free. The new circuit board flickered to life as she slid it into place, the tiny LEDs blinking hope. She paused, eyes scanning the complex network of sensors and valves before pulling a slim silver tablet from her satchel. There she brought up real-time diagnostic software, her own creation, designed to interface directly with the engine's subsystems. As the screen illuminated her face, Amara tapped rapidly, running a full diagnostic sweep. She narrated for the watching crowd, her voice a steady thread cutting through the tension. This scan checks for residual sabotage, faulty wiring, and data integrity across all feedback loops. The system must communicate flawlessly with the flight computer to prevent catastrophic failures at critical moments. In the control room at the back of the auditorium, Priya stood vigil, her eyes sharp as she monitored the encrypted telemetry stream Amara's device emitted. She nodded, silently calculating the odds, marveling at her friend's precision and nerve. Back on stage, a small crowd of engineers began to cluster, sidelining their earlier skepticism. One of the younger technicians, a thoughtful woman named Elsa, whispered to a colleague, "I didn't think it was possible to fix this in time." But Amara's method is genius. She's thinking beyond the hardware, integrating software too. Amara's fingers moved to a set of customized probes, carefully reconnecting the sensors Amara had left unplugged, those that had been deliberately tampered with to throw off the engine's feedback loops. She worked fast but methodically, refuting Harrington's assumption that she'd panic or falter. Next, I'm recalibrating the fuel injectors to optimize airflow and combustion balance. This reduces heat buildup and maximizes thrust efficiency. It's a protocol we developed in my last project cycle, but was never fully implemented due to politics and sabotage. The crowd chuckled softly at her deliberate choice of words. The atmosphere was electric, expectant, time rushing forward but slower, a paradox held taut. Though the clock that had counted down the 1-hour deadline for her impossible fix had run out long ago, no one was urging her to stop now. If anything, the moment had grown more solemn, more consequential. Harrington was gone. There was no more taunting, no more derision from the once omnipotent CEO. What remained was the raw nexus of truth and skill, embodied in a black woman whose brilliance had been undermined, but now, unmistakably, shone. A distant murmur rose as the engine's core began to hum under Amara's adjustments. Slowly, the cavernous industrial space filled with a low, pulsing vibration. The VY-16X was waking. The surrounding technicians rubbed eyes, some crossing their arms in disbelief. The chief engineer, who had stood stone-faced through much of the day, stepped into the light, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I never believed it could run like this again." Amara's lips twitched into a brief, proud smile. She's never been broken, just misrepresented. Priya's eyes sparkled behind the glass, and she tapped a few keys on her monitor to signal the control room. A soft alert confirmed that all systems were stabilized. "Fuel pressure steady," Amara announced. "Temperature readings are within expected operational ranges, and the auxiliary cooling systems are functioning optimally. We're within safe parameters." She took a breath and signaled the ground techs. "Begin the throttle increase." The massive engine responded instantly, its revolutions climbing like a beating heart. The vibrations deepened, a growing chorus of mechanical symphony, steel singing, air compressed, fuel exploding in a controlled dance of power. The crowd erupted as the once maligned and impossible engine surged to life, clean, efficient, and roaring with the promise of a future no one had dared hope for. Reporters raised their cameras higher, capturing the triumphant scene as Amara stood tall in the glow of her victory. Engineers exchanged looks of astonished respect. The previous witnesses to sabotage and scandal now found themselves confronting raw, undeniable expertise. Among them, a seasoned engineer whispered hoarsely, "She saved the damn thing. Not just fixed it, but made it better." Amara, sensing the shift, invited a few engineers to the stage, guiding them through the critical repair processes she'd employed. As she explained her approach, the fusion of inventive software recalibration and precise hardware intervention. The skeptical faces softened, many nodding appreciatively. "Why was this never done before?" one asked quietly. Amara's gaze met his, steady, unflinching. "Because it took the willingness to look deeper and the courage to do something no one else wanted to risk." The applause that followed was spontaneous, genuine, and sustained. Where once there had been derision and doubt, now there was respect. The tide had turned irrevocably. As the engine stabilized at full operational capacity, Amara stepped back. Her mission was complete. Not just the technical mastery before her, but the symbolic reclamation of her work, her intellect, and her integrity. The reporters streamed to her side, shouting questions, gathering sound bites. TV anchors marveled on live broadcast about the reversal of fortune, the stunning upset, the systemic justice now unfolding in real time. And through it all, Amara remained composed, the quiet strength of her resolve now echoing far beyond the auditorium. Priya approached her, releasing the breath she'd been holding since the challenge began. "You did it, Amara. You really did it." Amara smiled, clasping her friend's hand. "We did it, Priya. Together." Above them, the VY-16X thrummed steadily, a powerful symbol not just of reclaimed engineering, but of rebirth itself. As the crowd began to disperse, already abuzz with headlines of justice and innovation, a new chapter was quietly being written, one where brilliance, no matter how long suppressed, would finally claim the spotlight it deserved. And Aria Thompson, once cast aside, stood at the very heart of that new dawn. The roar of cameras and the flashing lights of 100 smartphones barely registered as Amara stepped up to the dais beside the sleek podium. The press conference had just been called on short notice, her first public appearance after the shocking arrests of Vincent Harrington and Gregory Ames. The new interim chairperson of Helios, a woman whose sharp eyes bespoke a no-nonsense approach to leadership, stood behind her with a humble smile, flanked by Priya Rao, who glowed quietly in the background. The room was packed. Journalists, board members, industry leaders, and even some government officials squeezed into the high-ceilinged conference hall. The atmosphere felt electric, not unlike the charged moment on the auditorium floor days ago. But this time, it was hope and respect rippling through the air instead of doubt and hostility. Amara adjusted the microphone, the familiar weight grounding her. The cluster of cameras focused on her, but instead of nerves, she felt calm, a steady fire ignited by all she had endured and achieved. She allowed herself a small, inward smile before speaking. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Amara began, voice steady and clear. "The events of the past weeks have exposed more than just corporate malfeasance. They've highlighted the systemic issues that persist in the scientific and technological communities, particularly the marginalization and erasure of voices that challenge the status quo." She paused briefly, scanning the audience. Many faces nodded, some intrigued, others contemplative. The world was watching. Now it was time to lead. "For years, my innovations in aerospace engineering were stolen, my reputation tarnished, and my career manipulated, all because I dared to be a black woman in a space dominated by entrenched power. Today, I stand not just for myself, but for everyone who has been excluded, underestimated, or erased from the narrative of progress. Respect for intellectual property is non-negotiable. But equally critical is respect for diversity, for inclusion, and for true collaboration in our field." The reporters scribbled furiously. Flashes exploded again. Priya stepped forward to her left, the warm smile they shared speaking volumes. "Together, with the new board and leadership here at Helios, we're committed to transforming this company into a beacon for innovation that embraces all backgrounds," Amara continued. "No longer will excellence be confined by prejudice or politics. We're launching a new division of inclusive research and innovation, which will prioritize the ideas, voices, and talents of underrepresented scientists and engineers. I am honored to accept the role of director for this program." A ripple of applause swept through the room, rising steadily as more recognized the weight of her words and the promise behind them. "Furthermore," Amara said, voice resolute, "Priya Rao, whose brilliant strategy and unwavering loyalty made this justice possible, will serve as Chief Technology Officer. Together, we'll ensure that not only our products, but our culture reflects fairness, accountability, and transparency." There was a beat of stunned silence, then enthusiastic approval. Priya's grin brightened, and in that moment, Amara felt the weight of every sleepless night, every whisper of doubt, every challenge transformed into potential. "The reforms we're undertaking at Helios won't stop there," Amara said, her tone stirring. "We've already begun drafting new corporate policies that will protect whistleblowers, ensure transparent audits, and make diversity a central pillar of our operational and ethical frameworks. These policies will stand as a model for the entire aerospace and tech industries." One of the reporters raised her hand, microphone extended. "Dr. Johnson, if I may, what advice would you give to other marginalized scientists who face similar obstacles in their careers?" Amara considered the question carefully. "Stay true to your vision and never let the noise of bias drown out your confidence," she replied thoughtfully. "Build alliances where you can and don't hesitate to fight for your work and worth. Change is possible, but it requires courage, persistence, and solidarity." The room erupted into applause once more. Amid the clatter of questions, Amara caught Priya's eye. A silent exchange of pride and determination. As the conference wound down, Helios's board chair stepped forward, her voice measured but sincere. "On behalf of Helios Aviation, I want to offer a heartfelt apology to Dr. Johnson for the wrongs she endured. We are committed to rebuilding trust, repairing damage, and leading the industry toward a more ethical future." Several board members nodded in agreement, shaking hands with Amara, their previous indifference replaced with respect. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Later that evening, in a quiet conference room, Amara and Priya met again, this time without cameras, without the glare of public scrutiny. The city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows flickered like constellations in a new universe Helios was only beginning to embrace. Amara sank into a leather chair, exhaustion and elation mingling within her. "It's surreal," she said quietly. "To think all this started with that ridiculous public dare, the humiliation." Priya smiled knowingly. "They wanted to break you, but instead, you broke their lies. You rewrote the story." Amara stretched her hands, remembering the intricate tangle of wires and algorithms she had navigated beneath the spotlight. It wasn't just about fixing an engine, it was about fixing a system. Priya nodded. "And now you're positioned to do just that, systemically, comprehensively. The research division, the policies, the representation, those aren't just words. They're actions that will open doors for the next generations." Looking out over the glittering skyline, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, far from it, but the victory was a beacon, and she would carry that light forward. "Do you think Helios really understands what it means to change?" Amara asked, eyes searching the horizon. "They will," Priya assured her, "because this time it's not just one woman standing up. It's a movement. And we, Amara corrected, smiling. "Exactly. We'll make sure this new dawn burns brighter than any before." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the following weeks, Helios's transformation accelerated. Amara was increasingly sought after for interviews, panel discussions, and leadership roundtables. Her vision sparked conversations across the aerospace sector and beyond about who gets to innovate and who gets left behind. She and Priya spearheaded workshops aimed at fostering mentorships, highlighting unconscious bias, and creating transparent pathways to leadership. One afternoon, as Amara prepared for a keynote at the National Aerospace Summit, she walked through the company's offices anew, now buzzing with a more vibrant, diverse energy. Walls once lined with portraits of uniformed white men now featured photos and stories of employees from every race, gender, and background celebrating their contributions. Her office door opened, and a young engineer, a recent hire and one of the first underrepresented recruits in the new program, stepped in shyly. "Dr. Johnson, I just wanted to say thank you. Your courage has inspired me to apply for a project lead position I thought was out of reach." Amara smiled warmly. "That's exactly why we're here, to build bridges so the next generation won't have to look back and ask, 'What if?' They'll just say, 'What's next?'" As the sun set beyond the horizon, Amara felt a deep, resonant fulfillment. She was no longer just the woman who remedied a broken machine. She was the architect of change, building a future where brilliance could no longer be dimmed by bias or fear. This was her new dawn, and it was just the beginning. Amara stepped through the wide glass doors of Helios Aviation's Innovation Center, the morning sunlight catching the ribbons of dust motes that danced in the bright, open foyer. The air here was no longer heavy with the acrid disappointment and tension she had once known. Instead, it hummed with a vibrant energy, a wave of hope and determination that rose from every corner. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, her eyes sweeping over the scene before her, a transformed space that was now a sanctuary for young minds, a launching pad for future's long-denied opportunity. Around her, in clusters and groups, Black students and other underrepresented youths filled the bright corridors, their voices bubbling with laughter and eager questions. They wandered purposefully between makeshift workshops, glass-walled classrooms, and prototype bays where engineers and mentors moved among them like guiding beacons. The once opulent white marble and chrome palace felt less intimidating and more welcoming, the sterile rigidity softened by murals emblazoned with images of trailblazers in aerospace and technology, the faces of forgotten pioneers, now celebrated. Amara's gaze fell on a group of teenagers gathered around a small jet engine replica, their mentor, a spirited woman with silver-streaked hair and keen eyes, explaining the core principles of aerodynamics and propulsion. Nearby, a cluster of elementary school children giggled as they fitted together colored model drones, their faces alight with the magic of creation. The center thrummed with possibility, a living testament to the hard-won progress she'd fought for. "This place," Amara said softly, her voice tinged with quiet wonder, "it's everything I dreamed it could be. No, it's more." Priya Rao came up beside her, slipping her hand into Amara's. "It's the future catching up with us," she said, her smile warm and steady. "We changed the narrative, Amara. Not just for us, but for every kid who's ever been told they don't belong." Amara nodded, her eyes moistening ever so slightly. I never wanted this fight for myself. I just wanted to do the work I love. But if our victory means more doors opening, then it's worth every sleepless night. Priya squeezed her hand. And it's only the beginning. Their footsteps echoed together as they walked toward the heart of the Innovation Center, the restored research wing, where the VY-16X engine, no longer a symbol of sabotage and betrayal, stood proudly displayed beneath a spotlight of gentle white LEDs. The engine gleamed, its polished casing reflecting the beams of light and the awe in the students' eyes. A plaque beside it read, "The VY-16X Engine of Revolution, fixed by Dr. Aria Thompson, 2024. A group of teenagers stood before the engine, their mentor explaining how the engine once symbolized the systemic barriers that kept them from advancing, but now embodied resilience and transformation. I want to show you something, Amara said, kneeling to eye level with the nearest group. This engine isn't just metal and wires. It's a story about what happens when people dare to challenge the status quo. Her voice softened behind the words, but the weight of her experience gave it strength. It teaches us that sometimes the biggest obstacles aren't just technical, they're human. Bias, sabotage, discrimination. But it also teaches us that courage, persistence, and truth can change everything. One of the students, a tall boy with sharp, bright eyes, raised his hand. Was it scary, standing in front of everyone, when they didn't believe in you? Amara smiled, the memory flooding back, the jeering, the condescension, the weight of every eye burning into her. But also the quiet voice in her heart that refused to waver. Yes, it was, she admitted. But fear doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're trying something important. And when you're trying to fix something broken, sometimes you have to stand alone before others join you. A quiet hush fell over the group as they absorbed her words. Priya rested a hand on Amara's shoulder, a reminder that no one truly stood alone anymore. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a young woman, racing up from the other wing, the new director of community partnerships at Helios, herself, once a scholarship student here. Dr. Johnson, the press is here for the interview, she said breathlessly. They want to know how it feels, now that Helios is finally turning the page. Amara took a deep breath, nodding. She allowed herself a final glance at the engine, a private thank you for the silent months of struggle and innovation it had witnessed. The press room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and microphones were thrust forward. Amara stood beside Priya once again, calm but radiating the fire of convictions forged in trials. Well, Dr. Johnson, a reporter began, the world watched as you faced down some of the highest hurdles, not just technical, but institutional. What does this victory mean to you personally? Amara's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of young women and men, engineers and journalists alike. It means hope, she said firmly. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told their voice doesn't matter, especially in this industry. It means that integrity and innovation are not mutually exclusive, that diversity is essential to true progress, and that change is possible when we hold people accountable and refuse to let injustice stand. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. What about Helios's future? Another voice pressed. What role do you see yourself playing now? I'm humbled to be leading a new division focused on equitable research initiatives where young talent from all backgrounds can thrive without fear of erasure or exploitation, Amara replied. And with Priya, as CTO, we're committed to transparency, collaboration, and lifting voices that have been silenced too long. Later, as the press conference tapered off, Amara and Priya retreated to a quiet rooftop overlooking the city skyline. The sun was dipping low, painting the clouds with strokes of gold and lavender. I never imagined we'd come this far, Priya said, leaning into Amara's side. We weren't meant to, Amara smiled. But destiny has a way of sneaking up on you when you're too busy building a better future. The two friends stood side by side, their silhouettes etched against the sprawling metropolis, a city ripe with innovation and raw potential. Below them, the Innovation Center glowed like a beacon, its windows aglow with the eager faces of tomorrow's scientists, engineers, and dreamers. For the first time in history, the halls echoed with the footsteps of those who would break barriers, redefine aerospace, and rewrite the story of possibility for generations to come. Amara whispered into the fading light, "This is the legacy we dreamed of. Not the kind handed down, but the kind we forged." And in the sudden hush of evening, the future began its steady, unyielding ascent. It is, Harrington continued, his face now all false magnanimity, an opportunity for all of us to revisit the fundamental question, can genius deliver when it matters most? Or, here he let his gaze pass over the gathering like a judge's gavel. When rigor falls short, should we acknowledge a need for new leadership? The laughter this time was not even masked. A younger intern, seated near the press riser, muttered, "She's the one they sacked last quarter, right?" His companion rolled her eyes. "Bet she can't even reboot that thing." Amara pressed her thumb against her palm. "Focus," she told herself. "You don't have the luxury of flinching." "Your moment, Dr. Johnson," Harrington said, voice as gentle as a knife's edge. He stepped aside, extending an arm toward a display cloaked in a shimmering silver tarp. "Show us, if you can, what makes a leader's promise reality." She crossed to the machine, each step echoing as if it might be her last. The hum of anticipation prickled up her spine. She steadied herself as the tarp was yanked away and bright lights glittered across the monstrous bulk of the engine she'd once designed, now battered, scarred, the heart of her own professional crucifixion. Amara squared her shoulders, cheeks burning not only with anger but with the knowledge of every moment, good and bad, that had led here. The board watched in stony silence. Old colleagues and rivals feigned boredom, but none looked away. All the while, a camera drone hovered overhead. Every blink, every tightening of her jaw would be magnified on millions of screens. Harrington stepped behind her, a vulture in Armani, and lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Welcome back, Dr. Johnson. May the world bear witness." Back straight, eyes clear, Amara laid her hands on the engine's cool, defiant steel, feeling the pulse of invention and betrayal beneath her skin. The stage was set, and in that crucible of humiliation, surrounded by doubters and wolves, Amara Johnson's resolve crystallized into something diamond-hard. She might be alone in the glare, but she would not let them see her break. The neon lights of the Helios Innovation Forum still burned down on Amara, but the laughter now faded to a low, uneasy murmur. The crowd waited as Harrington let the silence stretch. His smile, artfully warm for the cameras, was all calculation behind his sharp eyes. The amphitheater held the world's top aviation reporters, investors, the full engineering brain trust of Helios Aviation, and hundreds tuning in virtually. It was a spectacle, and Amara was the main event. Harrington cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I might have your attention." His voice rolled over the room like velvet dipped in acid. "Dr. Johnson has generously, though perhaps unwittingly, agreed to attempt what our best minds have declared impossible. To dispel doubts, let us make the terms explicit." Amara's jaw tensed, lips tight, but her eyes remained unwavering. She stood centered before the stage, refusing to shrink for their sport. As Harrington continued, his tone sharpened. "You have 1 hour, Dr. Johnson, 60 minutes, not a second more, to repair the VY-16X, Helios's most advanced yet regrettably uncooperative engine. You may use any of the standard tools provided." He gestured grandly toward the shining toolbox glinting under the lights. "Should you succeed, I will see you returned to full standing with a research grant worthy of your supposed genius, public recognition, carte blanche to pursue your work." A mocking pause. He drew a neatly folded letter from his suit pocket. Helios's signature grant agreement, a gold seal winking in the cameras. It looked stage-managed, and the audience played along, some with polite applause, more with thinly veiled disbelief. "But if you fail," he added, his voice dipping low, "your reputation here and across the industry will reflect your performance permanently." His eyes swept the room, making sure none missed the threat. "Helios will release a statement correcting any misconceptions about your role in our latest projects. There will be no more confusion about who, if anyone, applied the so-called Johnson algorithms in this company's work." A ripple of scornful laughter traveled through the cluster of Helios's senior engineers, most notably from Gregory Ames, a man with the brittle confidence of one who'd always played by rules written for his benefit. Amara glanced toward the wings. There, behind the tech table, she caught a flash of movement. Priya Rao, her closest friend and ally, held her gaze. Priya's eyes radiated a fierce, silent encouragement, a thumb quickly brushing her own collar in a barely noticeable gesture. The signal. Amara nodded minutely, drawing strength from the bond, and fixed her attention forward, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. A brittle silence seemed to vibrate off the auditorium walls, pressed in around Amara, as the VY-16X's monstrous form hovered center stage, its battered panels a testament to both innovation and betrayal. The hour started with a sharp digital beep from Harrington's giant countdown clock. With so many eyes fixed on her, sizing her up like a curiosity, an amusement, an outcast, Amara felt their collective skepticism pounding in her chest. She forced her breathing steady, the edges of the world blurring just enough to make space for her memories to slip in, sharp and purposeful. She remembered the first time she saw the algorithm in protoform, floating like a constellation on her bedroom wall, scribbled formulas tacked between childhood photos and Princeton gear. Months before all this spectacle and ruin, those code fragments were the private language of her mind, impossible efficiency, fuel to thrust calculations singing with the promise to change everything Helios thought it knew about propulsion. And she remembered the afterglow of that breakthrough, how she'd practically run to Priya's little glass-walled office, babbling about modular burn patterns and thermal immunity. Priya, as always, had listened, her head tilted just so, dark hair backlit by rows of data streams. "You know you can trust me, right?" she'd whispered, as if sensing a threat that neither of them could yet see. "Protect your source code, Amara. Don't share it until the paperwork's filed." Amara had trusted too many, she realized now. The weeks afterward blurred, her confidential work somehow materializing in Helios's official schema, questions from higher-ups that felt like tests. Then, the slights, the stunted credit, the late-night emails not meant for her but forwarded anyway, subject lines like, "Cut our losses, Johnson's expendable," and the threats, anonymous, typed in a font more clinical than menacing, but chilling all the same. "Back down. Quiet your ambitions. We know where it came from." These weren't warnings for a stubborn engineer. They were the cracks before the landslide. She'd carried this private war into every meeting, every lab shift. Only Priya, her loyal co-conspirator, saw the toll it took. Priya, who had the digital keys to every shadow in Helios's network, who began piecing together a timeline out of suspicious logins, file duplicated at odd hours, strange encrypted emails linking high-level project managers with overseas IP addresses. "They're bleeding you dry, girl," Priya had murmured, urgency threaded through her voice as she worked late into the night. "But they're not even covering their tracks well." Priya's paranoia had saved her more than once. Now her voice came soft and urgent, nearly lost under the crowd's restless anticipation. Amara pressed a palm to her abdomen, pretending to ground herself when, really, she was opening the channel on the necklace mic hidden below her collar. "Audio's clear. Recording you live," Priya whispered in her ear through the microscopic receiver. "Crowd noise is hiding everything. But I'm in the control room, Amara. Any sign of fresh sabotage? Say it out loud, and I'll flag it for the feds." Amara nodded subtly, her gaze flicking up to where Priya's slim outline was visible behind the glass of the AV booth, her hands fidgeting nervously among the wires. Priya offered the smallest nod, reassuring and fierce. Amara felt something solid and secret settle under her ribs. She was not alone. Around her, the audience saw only a solitary figure, impossibly isolated, handed an impossible task, while in fact, an unspoken alliance hummed beneath the surface. She kept that secret coiled tight in her chest and bent down to examine the first engine panel, hands gloved, nerves shifting into pure focus. The auditorium noise faded, replaced by the steady rhythm in her ears, metal on metal, the gentle click of fasteners. She unlatched the housing, careful not to cut herself on the sharp aluminum, and tried not to hear Gregory Ames's pointed snicker from offstage, or the wet sound of journalists scribbling her every movement. They all thought this was about humiliation. None of them understood that it was evidence she was looking for, just as much as a solution. Again, her mind drifted, brief, involuntary, to the day she found her own code, sniffed through Helios's systems. She'd run the audit herself, her algorithms buried deep in directories labeled as joint development, and brought the proof to Harrington's office. For a moment, she'd believed he'd do the right thing. A moment quickly crushed beneath his glib assurance that innovation was always a team effort. Her protest had cost her everything. But she wasn't that woman today. Not the one shaking in the hallways. Not the one who left her badge on the desk and walked away with shoulders slumped. She'd lived that exile, transformed it into fuel. Now, every click and turn of her screwdriver felt like an act of reclamation. She fished a slim flashlight from her pocket, illuminating the engine's tangled innards. Metal glinted, a tangle of wires, two of them spliced with an odd, lumpy solder bead. No Helios mechanic worth their salt would have left something like this, she thought. Not unless they had a reason. Seeing non-standard wiring harness, Amara spoke, voice casual enough to seem like idle thinking, but Priya would decode every word. "Looks patched. Possible damage to the guidance sensor intended." Across the auditorium, Priya busied herself with her laptop, tapping keys as she traced her internal warning signs. If you find anything too obvious, keep your hands clear. If there's a trap, I want a picture. Amara gave the gentlest nod, then angled her smartwatch for a quick snap, careful not to draw attention. Harrington was posturing again by the edge of the stage, a sly grin twisting his lips. He called to her. Having trouble already, Dr. Johnson. We can always call in the real engineers. Laughter rose, but she barely heard it. It wasn't laughter that lingered in her mind, but a snatch of Priya's voice in the dark. You keep fighting. I'll keep digging. The real story comes out together. Or not at all. Amara exhaled, coldly checking the next component. The data input module. Her hands were steady now, practiced and precise. She worked beneath the indignity and watched, through eyes narrowed with hard-won resolve, for the next mistake, the next handprint of sabotage. If she succeeded today, it would not be as their pawn. It would be as herself. And with Priya at her back, maybe, just maybe, as the harbinger of justice they never saw coming, the hour was only just beginning. The moment Amara's work gloves touched the VY-16X's battered titanium skin, the auditorium's hush sharpened into scrutiny so taut it vibrated. The jet engine, elevated on hydraulics at center stage, resembled a dead creature freshly laid out for post-mortem. She could feel every gaze, hungry, skeptical, or outright dismissive, digging into her back as she slowly, purposefully circled the engine, eyes skimming for weak points and hidden dangers. From the wings, the faintest flicker of movement. Priya, almost invisible in her black tailored suit, nodded once, a subtle gesture that said, I'm with you. Amara's pulse steadied. The mic, cleverly looped into her obsidian beaded necklace, felt like a warm hand at her throat. She detached the VY-16X's primary access panel with controlled finesse, twisting the custom latch she herself had engineered before Helios's leadership stripped her project and her dignity clean. The satisfying clink as it opened was more than physical. It felt like she was reclaiming something essential, something no whisper campaign or boardroom treachery could erase. From somewhere overhead, the CEO's baritone echoed, Dr. Johnson appears to be beginning with the basic access. Let's see if a fresh start leads to fresh answers. Laughter trailed his words, but Amara blocked it out. Her focus tunneled into the exposed circuitry cascading before her like a storm-broken river, chaotic with tangled wires and scorched insulation. Her eyes narrowed. The expected backbone wiring, a Fibonacci pattern of red, blue, and silver cables, which she designed for minimal heat loss, had been rewired, bulky ferrite bead meshes wedged in clumsily among them. Several interface chips blinked to alert in abnormal rhythms, signals she recognized instantly as sabotage. Not entropy, but intent. Two Helios engineers hovered nearby, arms crossed, eyes glittering with anticipation. She's gonna short the whole board, one muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Instead, Amara pulled a small thermographic scanner from her tool cart, ran it in arcs across the network, and watched as the hidden hotspots and dead zones lit up on her wrist display. Into the mic, she murmured for Priya's ears only. Booby traps confirmed. Multiple fail-safes overridden. Are they watching you? Invisible for now. Priya's voice vibrated softly in her inner ear, the faintest hum beneath the crowd's restlessness. Gregory's trying to get on my terminal. I've looped him out. Copy. Amara's hands moved again, dismantling an auxiliary heatsink, another of her early innovations, now warped with evidence of forced tampering. She felt the pressure of Vincent Harrington's gaze from across the stage, could almost hear his white-knuckled patience. He needed her to appear stumped. Every minute she worked was both more ammunition for his narrative, and, if she succeeded, more rope for him to hang by. The sprawling auditorium hummed with whispered doubts and barely concealed amusement as Amara knelt beside the hulking VY-16X jet engine. The clock above the stage marked 35 minutes remaining, more than half her allotted time, yet the weight of every passing second felt unrelenting. Vincent Harrington's voice sliced through the murmurs again, his tone low but laced with sneer as he circled the stage like a predator marking his territory. Notice how Dr. Johnson is fiddling with circuitry that even I dared not touch, he said, eyes glinting as the cameras zeroed in on her every move. A disaster waiting to happen, no doubt. But let's see if she can even get close to making this monstrosity cooperate. Amara's fingers twisted a stubborn bolt, her mind working at a relentless pace. But her gaze never wavered from the engine's core. She'd expected Harrington's mind games, the calculated attempts to fluster her before the world, but beneath his bluster, the man was desperate. Each condescending word sketched cracks in the polished veneer of his confidence, something Amara now understood she could exploit. From the corner of her eye, she caught Gregory Ames stepping closer, the chief designer of the VY-16X, his expression thinly veiled irritation. Ames's reputation for arrogance was well known. His unsolicited advice was a tactic, a way to sow confusion in front of the cameras and shift suspicion away from the company's underhanded tactics. "Dr. Johnson," Ames interjected smoothly, voice dripping with fake concern, "you're looking at the ignition module all wrong. You need to recalibrate the synchronization matrix before accessing the combustion chamber. Otherwise, the engine will fail." Amara looked up, meeting his gaze steadily without missing a beat. "Actually, Mr. Ames," she replied, her tone calm but unmistakably firm, "the synchronization matrix here has been deliberately reprogrammed with an outdated algorithm. If I tried to recalibrate based on the current firmware, it would trigger a shutdown. I'm isolating the corrupted data pathways first." Ames's jaw clenched, but she continued, voice low so only Priya and the agents listening over comms might understand. "I wonder why a company with millions invested would use such a risky, obsolete component, especially in the ignition sequence." Amara's whispered update sent a ripple through the small earpiece Priya wore, prompting silent thumbs up. Behind the stage, Priya's fingers flew over multiple keyboards, peeling back layers of encrypted communication logs that revealed a web of sabotage and intellectual theft tied directly to Harrington's inner circle. Back at the engine, Amara's eyes narrowed as she carefully peeled back a panel near the ignition module, revealing a tangle of wires that didn't belong. The wiring configuration was inconsistent with the official blueprints she'd seen when designing her original algorithm. Each splice had been expertly disguised, but not well enough for someone trained as deeply as she was. "Sabotage," she muttered to herself, lips barely moving. "This isn't a flaw, it's a trap." Harrington prowled closer, sensing the shift in momentum. His smile thinned, replaced by a scowl, as he leaned in to speak directly to the audience, flair in his voice like a ringmaster skeptical of his star performer. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared loudly, "what you're witnessing is, frankly, an exercise in futility. This engine has confounded the best minds at Helios. If Dr. Johnson can somehow overcome sabotage for which she's clearly unprepared, I owe her my gratitude. But don't hold your breath." Amara's hands didn't falter. The audience barely noticed her slight twitch toward the necklace embedded with an imperceptible mic, her lifeline to Priya. Through the tiny comms link, Priya whispered, "Asterisk, more chatter. Ames just sent a questionable code to the engine's mainframe. Rerouting now." Amara nodded, a silent affirmation, then spoke aloud. "I'm overriding the intrusive codes now. Mr. Harrington, your engineers have left traces in the system, ghost instructions meant to confuse diagnostics. I think your confidence in their loyalty is misplaced." The murmurs in the hall turned sharper, a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect threading through the crowd. Harrington's smirk faded into a tight line. Ames, frustrated beyond polite measures, stalked up to Amara, voice barely above a growl. "You're bluffing. There's no way you can bypass encryption without corrupting the entire engine core." Amara paused, then tilted her head slightly. "On the contrary, Mr. Ames, I'm adapting my original algorithm to create dynamic error correction pathways. It's something your team never considered, because the approach requires a flexible, deep learning matrix capable of identifying malicious code in real time. Something I pioneered long before Helios ever saw fit to acknowledge." "But the false accusation is your own, isn't it?" Amara countered, stepping closer to the engine, to the crowd, to the truth. "The only question now, how many others here have been complicit? And how many more will you try to silence next?" At that, a few engineers averted their gazes, whispering to one another. A tremor of doubt crept into the corporate veneer, seeding distrust. One of the younger board members, a woman with pursed lips and hawk-like eyes, exchanged a look with her colleague that said volumes. Was this the beginning of the end for Helios, as they knew it? The room felt charged, as if the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Amara shifted focus back to the engine. With a calm voice, she explained to the silent room, "This engine was designed to push boundaries, to innovate flight technology, but the sabotage wasn't just technical, it was personal." She gestured toward the circuitry now exposed, the tangled mismatched wires that defied the engineering principles anyone reputable should uphold. If this part had worked as it should, the ignition would fire cleanly every time. Instead, it was rigged to fail, deliberately. Whispers grew louder. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail as the tension thickened. Suddenly, the auditorium doors at the back burst open. Uniformed agents entered briskly, their badges visible, and a sense of authority radiating through the air. A ripple of gasps swept the crowd. Reporters swiveled their cameras, catching the moment from every angle. One of the agents stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Vincent Harrington and Gregory Ames, you're under arrest for theft of intellectual property, corporate sabotage, and conspiracy." Harrington's jaw tightened, but he managed a derisive laugh. "This is a witch hunt," he spat, "a publicity stunt by a disgraced former employee." But the agents were unfazed. They presented their warrants, and amidst the chaos, began to escort Harrington and Ames toward the exits. The mass of onlookers buzzed with a mixture of shock and triumph. Amara took a slow breath, chest swelling with a quiet sense of justice hard won. Priya, stepping forward from the control area, joined her on the stage and clasped her hand in solidarity. Their eyes met for a moment, sharing the unspoken acknowledgement of every risk taken, every sleepless night endured. The auditorium, once echoing with derision and scorn, now hummed with the electric pulse of reckoning. As the lead federal agent gently guided Harrington out past the sea of stunned faces, Amara raised her voice just enough for the waiting cameras. "This isn't just about me. It's about all the voices that have been silenced, the ideas stolen, the barriers imposed on those who dare to innovate differently. Today marks not just my victory, but the beginning of a new chapter in aviation and justice." The crowd responded with a slow, building applause that soon erupted into full ovation. Engineers who had once whispered derision now stood, nodding in respect. Some of the more skeptical board members exchanged looks of grudging realization. Priya leaned close and whispered, "They're watching, Amara. The tide just turned." Amara nodded slightly, the weight of the hour heavy but no longer crushing. She turned back to the engine, her fingers brushing over it with renewed purpose. This was more than a battle for a single invention. It was the fulcrum on which her future, and perhaps the future of Helios, would pivot. The silence that followed was not one of defeat, but of anticipation. Amara tightened a bolt here, reconnected a sensor there. The hourglass was far from empty. The real work, the validation of her brilliance, had only just begun. With the scoreboard ticking mercilessly toward zero, Amara's fingers danced over the exposed circuits of the VY-16X, lips pressed thin with determination. The auditorium, a cavernous hive of anticipation, felt unbearably still, every eye trained on the woman who had been set up to fail. Her breath was steady, her movements sure, even as Vincent Harrington prowled the stage, a living shadow of scorn and disbelief. But Amara had reached a precipice, a moment where she could no longer contain the truth that burned inside her. She paused, lifting a wrist to tap the screen of her smartwatch, sending a coded message to Priya. Confirmation flashed back almost immediately. The agents were en route, gathering the last threads of evidence needed to unravel Harrington's carefully constructed facade. Amara knew what she had to do. She stepped back from the engine, voice rising with unassailable clarity. "This ignition code, this algorithm embedded in the module here, is my original work. It's the same one I patented in 2017, long before Helios Aviation even conceived this design." Amara exhaled, the weight of months of scrutiny lifting slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But there's still work to be done." As the crowd's attention shifted, a gallery of live tweets and social media posts flooded public screens, hashtagged #JusticeForAmara and #HeliosScandal. The story spiraled beyond the confines of the auditorium into the public consciousness. News outlets dissected the events minute by minute, and advocacy groups hailed Amara's courage. Meanwhile, Priya's laptop buzzed softly, her nimble fingers dialing in diagnostics on the partially repaired VY-16X engine sitting dormant center stage. "What do you want to do?" she asked gently. Amara glanced over to the engine, the very heart of the ordeal that had tried to break her. "Finish the demonstration," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Let them see what it was always supposed to be." Priya smiled, the faintest flicker of relief lighting her features. "Let's give them a show." Returning to the stage, amidst the aftershocks of the arrests, Amara approached the VY-16X with the steady hands of a master technician. The audience, now hushed, turned their full attention back to the ordeal. Film crews recorded her every deliberate movement as she began explaining her next steps, intertwining technical brilliance with a calm authority that imperceptibly shifted the crowd's energy. "This engine," she began, "was designed to be a breakthrough in efficiency and safety, but it was sabotaged in multiple ways: faulty wiring, corrupted software modules, and mismatched hardware that would have prevented its launch." She gestured to the segment she worked on. These areas have now been repaired and optimized using my original algorithms, which I developed specifically to overcome the limitations of previous designs. Her fingers moved deftly, reconnecting circuits with surgical precision while narrating her decisions. By recalibrating the ignition timing and integrating real-time adaptive controls, the engine can now maintain atmospheric pressure and combustion efficiency without overheating. The crowd leaned in, some engineers nodding slowly, others whispering astonishment. This was no longer merely a technical demonstration. It was a public restoration of Amara's reputation and the reclaiming of her intellectual legacy. Seconds stretched like hours as she prepared for the final test. Initiating startup sequence, she announced. Fingers pressed the ignition button firmly. The engine sputtered, then breathed in a deep, steady rhythm as combustion cycles synced perfectly. A low hum surged into a powerful, consistent roar that echoed through the auditorium. Applause erupted spontaneously. Once hostile engineers were the first to rise, clapping and cheering with genuine admiration. Behind the scenes, Priya's eyes shimmered with tears of joy. Board members exchanged stunned glances, the scandal now overshadowed by this undeniable proof of excellence. Amara stood tall at the engine's side, a quiet smile curving her lips. Against every hurdle, the sabotage, the public humiliation, the systemic betrayal, she had endured. Her solution had triumphed. As the applause washed over her, she glanced toward the empty corner where Harrington and Ames had been moments ago. Their downfall was complete, a bitter end born of corruption and fear of her brilliance. Before the crowd could burst into any more noise, Amara raised a hand to call for silence. "Let this moment be a new beginning," she said firmly, "for innovation, for inclusion, and for justice. What we create here should never be stifled by greed, pride, or prejudice." The words floated in the charged air, an unspoken vow, as much to herself as to everyone present. The VY-16X's steady pulse underscored the promise. Technology undimmed by sabotage, a future unmarred by injustice. Priya stepped forward, standing beside Amara as the auditorium lights dimmed around the gleaming engine. The scene was set, the dawn of a new era at Helios, led by a woman they had tried to break, now unbreakable. The federal agents remained near the stage, monitoring the crowd but giving space to the celebration unfolding. Media crews prepared for the next segment, interviews, statements, the immediate fallout of the Helios corporate upheaval. But for now, as the VY-16X engine's steady purr filled the room, Amara and Priya shared a quiet moment of profound victory amid the storm. The long fight was far from over, but this chapter, once marked by sabotage and scorn, had been rewritten, stamped with justice and undeniable brilliance. The stage was set for the reckoning to continue. But tonight, victory, technical, moral, and personal, belonged to Dr. Aria Thompson.